was my first exposure to racism because someone was questioning my intelligence. Because we always had to work harder than everybody else. The way you speak in South Africa can also have an impact on how people perceive your intelligence.
And it just shows that after 30 years of democracy in South Africa, there's still so much racism. Hello and welcome to How's Your Heart podcast. It is Linda for short. Thank you so much for the new people that have joined the channel. I appreciate your time, taking your time to watch the content. And if you're new here and you like my content, please consider subscribing. It is free, but it means a lot to me. Thank you so much. And today I have a special guest. Welcome, Mumtaz.
Thank you.
Mumtaz or Mumtaz?
Mumtaz.
I think I said Mumtaz for a very
the
long
longest
time.
Yeah. You're not the only one. That's
For a
fine.
very long time I said Mumtaz. Okay, Mumtaz, welcome.
Thank
Does it mean
you.
anything?
Yeah, it means excellence.
No ways.
yeah.
No ways. I love hearing people's names and their meanings.
Yeah.
And you excel.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You excel.
Living up to my name. Trying to live up to my name.
You do. So how I met Mumtaz, we worked together at our previous firm. She was my senior, and yeah, we had a good time on that client.
No, we did. We had lots of fun. Lots of learning, but lots of fun.
Yeah, you're one of the people when I remember when I did my review, you were like, nah, do this again. I don't know what it is because I think it's kind of an imposter syndrome thing.
It is.
And you're like, well, I was thinking at the time, well, I'm maybe supposed to be doing this. Maybe it's not performing at the next level. We're already talking about work, but
One step back first.
yeah, but I think you are one of the people that gave me that confidence to just say, okay, yeah, I did this, like, and just not own up, but be more confident in the fact that, okay, like, yeah, I'm not that bad.
Yeah. No, that was actually one of my aims because I noticed that when I was working with females, especially females of color,
Yeah.
the acceptance of I am actually doing a good job is something almost every single one of them struggle with, to have that confidence to be like, I did well.
Yeah.
Because I used to be exactly the same and it took someone to pull me out of that. So once I got out of that, I was like, well, now everybody else also got it realize,
Yeah.
you know? So that's when I was like, if I work with a female, especially a female of color, and they're doing an excellent job, because obviously not everybody performs the same. I'm not going to tell someone that just because I'm like, okay, I want to, like, I don't know, you know, make them feel good about themselves. It's when I actually see someone is doing a good job and they can't recognize it in themselves, then I'm like, hey, we need to fix something here. So that's why I was like, when I saw that, I was like, Linda, what are you doing?
We're not talking about that today. So the podcast is, how is your heart?
Oh, I can honestly say content. And I think it took me a long time to get here. I was obviously not doing well in the beginning of the year, and that knocked me down quite a bit. But since then, I think it also forced me to slow down a bit and to take a restock of my life and be like,
Right.
what am I doing? Where am I going? What's important to me?
Yeah.
And am I living my life according to those values I say are my values? And since then, I think I've changed my boundaries. I've changed the way I live life.
Yeah.
And so now I can honestly say I'm content. Because it's one thing to say I'm happy, right? No one should be happy all the time. That's weird.
Yeah.
But to be content is a completely different feeling. It means that no matter what's going on in your life, whether something good is happening or something bad is happening, you're content with every situation. And you're just living life calm. And it's actually a really nice experience. So my heart is doing really well, thank you.
Wow. How do you get to a place of contentment? Obviously, you just spoke about, you know, doing the internal work and aligning yourself to the values. Like, is that an easy process?
It's not. And I think a lot plays a part in getting to that point. Firstly, it's difficult depending on the upbringing you had, where you come from, what your experiences are. We all have trauma to some level, right? And so that trauma also has an impact on how you act as an adult. And then also the situation you're in, you can be like, oh, maybe I don't deserve this, maybe I deserve something else. But the way I grew up is that you were never promised anything. Like even from a religious perspective, God never promised you an easy life. That's how we grew up. And so if I look at even the stories in the Quran, or which are similar to the stories in the Bible about Moses, Abraham, none of them had easy lives, right? And they were like some of the best people in God's eyes. So if they didn't have an easy life, who's little old me, right? And yet their faith didn't waver. And so for me, it was also about looking at myself or what I was doing from a religious perspective and realigning my faith with what was happening in my life. And that's what helped me reach a place of contentment, is that recognizing that I can't control every single situation that happens to me, but I can control how I act and I can control how I feel about it. And so every time I went through something, I would take a step back to think about, why am I feeling this way? Is there also something else from my past that is highlighting or making this emotion feel more heightened than it actually is? And so then it was going back and doing the work on that trauma that I experienced until I could be like, actually now I recognize why I act a certain way in certain situations, and how I can feel about it now that I'm an adult and I've put myself in this safe space. And so it took a lot of work and a long time to get here, and it's still an ongoing process, but it's one that's definitely worth it.
I heard about this concept of parenting your younger self. And I remember hearing about it and I was like, okay, so basically it's about whatever traumas that you faced when you were growing up, and basically asking yourself, how could I parent better that younger version of myself? Do you feel like you went through that process?
I did. And it's a crazy experience to go through, because I saw a video that you have to sit and almost like imagine talking to yourself. Like a younger you.
As a younger version of you,
A younger you, and actually have that conversation to tell them, actually, you are safe now. You are doing well now. You did get out of that situation. And that was a hard conversation. You have to firstly picture yourself as a little child. And then re-put yourself in your shoes to be like, actually, at that point in my life, that is how I was feeling. Because I keep telling, my friends, that the life I'm living now is a life I could never, ever have imagined. Right? When I was growing up, for me, to just have a basic job, no matter what it was, that meant I'm going to have a roof over my head, I'm going to have food every day, and I'm going to live a fairly average, basic, comfortable life. For me, that was the dream, right? Because that's the standard when you don't grow up with a lot, right? And so the life I live now, for me, this was for not people like me. This was for people that didn't look like me. And so for me, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't achievable. I didn't imagine living in another country. I never imagined traveling, because I didn't have money. So I was like, that's just a dream that's beyond it. And now that I'm living a life that I never could have imagined, I'm like, younger me would not even believe it. So firstly, I need to sit her down and tell her, actually, girl,
you are doing so much
well.
better.
You did so well. Like, you were so strong so that I could be
the
where
person that
I
you
am
are
now. And so a lot of it is owed to your past self. And so to then go back and talk to that version of yourself, to be like, you don't have to keep it together anymore. You can let go because I have it now.
Okay.
Life-changing experience.
Let's go back a bit. I want to tap into like how you grew up. Like, what was your upbringing like?
So I am, mixed race in the UK, colored in South Africa. But my upbringing was very different in that both my parents are not colored.
Okay.
So my mom is of Indian ethnicity and my dad is colored.
Okay.
So that makes me colored. By definition, anybody that's mixed is colored in South Africa, right? But in South Africa, all race groups are also culturally different. Even within a certain race groups, you're going to get different cultures. For example, white people, you get the Afrikaans versus English. They're very different. In the colored community, you get the Cape Malays versus the not Cape Malay coloreds. And that culture is also very different. Then even within the Indian culture, that's different. With black people, that's also different, because you get your Zulus, you get your Xhosas, you get everybody else. And so for me, growing up, I didn't feel like I could fit anywhere. Because the one half of my family, like in my family, my siblings are now the only ones that are mixed.
Damn.
In terms of like we have Indian mother and colored father. So all of my Indian family is Indian and all of my colored family is colored. So we grew up very different because obviously you grow up
and you look different.
We look different, first of all. So we also, like in my dad's family, they used to call us, which is a very derogatory term, Morikanas, because we had an Indian mother. For them, sometimes, I don't know if they meant it in a derogatory way, but that's how they refer to us because that already made us other, right? And then on top of that, we also very English speaking, whereas a lot of my dad's family is Afrikaans. So then there was also that language thing. My granny is very nice in that she tries to speak English to us. But still, there's that gap in terms of how we grew up versus what that side of our family is. And that's the side of the family we saw because they're all in Cape Town, whereas my mother's family is in like Joburg, Durban, well, outside of Cape Town, basically. But then also with my mother's family, who we didn't see often, that relationship also didn't grow because I maybe saw them 3-4 times my entire life. But then also we're not fully Indian because my mother didn't raise us like that. My mother was like, you grow up based on your religion. And so what religion takes preference over culture in our household. Whatever, if culture cross or dictates something, but culture goes against that, religion takes preference. So, for example, in a lot of these Indian and colored communities, to cross-marry is still seen as like a thing, right? People look down upon it. They don't like it. They don't like it. And whereas Islam teaches that there is no barrier when it comes to you can marry anybody, basically, obviously of the same faith, but as long as they're a good person, the color of their skin or their ethnicity or their culture should not make a difference. It's their values and who they are as a person that
So who is Muslim between your parents?
Both my parents.
Okay.
Both my parents are Muslim.
Okay.
And that's the other misconception of like growing up in South Africa is that people assume that Muslim is on its own and then there's race, but they don't realize that just like Christianity, Muslim is also just a faith, and that you still fall into other races and cultures.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the time, also when I got or people saw me in South Africa, they'd be like, "Oh, you're Muslim. So how can you be colored? Or how can you also be Indian?"
Yeah.
And I'd be like, "Not the same thing."
Because yeah.
And so you grow up a lot of the time based on how your mother raises you because they have more of a hand on you. And so we did grow up, I guess, our food was Indian because my mother was Indian. And so, but also because she wasn't very cultural, we didn't grow up with any sort of cultural experience. So it made it harder for me to feel like I fit in from a cultural perspective.
Right.
And then I also didn't identify with the people who are also mixed cross-culture because it's often people that are, they have like one parent from one race and one parent from another race. It's not like two different types of brown basically mixing together.
Yeah.
And so even that mixed race first generation is also a completely different experience to everybody else's mixed race. And then depending on whether your mother's Indian or your father's Indian, that also makes a difference to you. So like all of the people I know that are like cross-cultured basically, like me, they have one Indian parent and one colored parent. We all grew up very differently still. And so culturally, you don't feel like you fit in anywhere fully. But that being said, that wasn't something I fully picked up until I was growing up. Like I didn't understand it to a degree because we were also very sheltered. We didn't see our family a lot. And the reason for that was my dad's family grew up very differently and my mother wanted us to pursue an education. And that's not something that's pursued on that side of the family, really. And she wanted us to make something of our life. She was like, she wants better for us than what she had. And so she wanted to make sure she made us basically stay disciplined, stay focused. So everything she did was to drive us towards that goal of achieving something.
When you say us,
my
how
siblings
many
and I.
how many
I
siblings do you have?
2 siblings,
Okay.
1 brother and 1 sister. They're both older than me.
Okay.
And so for her, it was like, you're going to pursue education. Everything you do is going to make sure that you set yourself up in life financially to be comfortable, to not be reliant on anybody. That was her goal. And so that was our focus growing up. We didn't grow up with a lot. And so there were struggles, like we couldn't afford a lot. But her focus was, as long as you can get an education, that was all that mattered, basically. And so, that was me growing up in South Africa. I also went to a fully brown school, you can say.
Mm-hmm.
So my exposure to other races were also not that much. Like, obviously, we know everyone exists in South Africa, right? But in South Africa, naturally, within communities, people live within their communities according to their race.
Yeah.
Not on purpose, but because of apartheid, people just ended up staying where they were. Not a lot of people moved out. Whether due to financial reasons or other reasons, there's a lot of factors that go into that.
That's true.
And so the school I went to was it was a public school. It was mainly colored people and Indian and coloreds, basically. And so my first cross-culture, full cross-culture experience was when I got to uni. And I went to UCT. And the school...
Wait, before we get there, I just wanna just flash out. Obviously, I think we've gotten into the crux of the topic. We're talking about race, and it's something that I really want to understand, especially when it comes to like the colored people in South Africa. So we're talking about race and racism, and if it is a sensitive topic. So just be cautious in listening to the conversation. Hopefully, there won't be anything that is triggering, but obviously, it is a sensitive topic. Yeah. I just want to talk about what you said about, Black people. I grew up in the village. So for me, the concept of someone different was completely lost on me until I moved. Obviously, you go to the shops, you see white people, see different people, but in the community, it's just Black people, closer people as well. So me getting to know other people of other cultures was probably when I went to high school. Even then, I went to my first year of high school, predominantly Black private school, because it's in East London. There's not a lot of other cultures. Then I moved to Cape Town, and that's when I was like exposed to this. Colored people, because there are colored people in East London, but very different with Cape coloreds. So let's talk about in terms of the economic aspect, because you talk about you didn't have a lot. What was not a lot?
Okay, so I don't know actually how to describe it.
Okay, let me say this, because
for me, okay, I won't say in that like I ever went to bed hungry. So I recognize that is a blessing. The reason I'm not saying we were poor is because I felt like to some extent I still had privilege. In that I had a roof over my head always. We didn't have to worry. Well, if we did have that struggle, my parents never let it be known to us. I never went to bed hungry. I always knew I was going to have food. What that food was going to be was indefinite. We obviously had foods that stretched to some extent. But growing up when you were a kid, that's normal, right? You're like, okay, we're eating this food.
You don't know when you're going through it.
You don't know when you're going through it. But as an adult, then you'll hear your parents saying, no, back then we were like literally counting change to buy bread, like to see if we had enough to buy bread, or that there were times where they'd made sure we eat, but they didn't eat. But that wasn't something they let us know growing up. And so for the first 6 years of my life, we stayed, all 5 of us, in a single bedroom in a separate entrance, which is basically an outhouse behind somebody else's house, basically. And the first, I think maybe 6 years of my life that's how we stayed. But I didn't know any different. Right? I didn't know that isn't what other people did, because I also wasn't going to school. I didn't go to creche and preschool. My mother taught us at home, and so she was like, she didn't see the need. So we could read, write in like English, we could read Arabic as well by the time we were 4. So for her, she didn't see the need to also send us that. I mean, also it was money that didn't need to be spent then, obviously.
Also, it is quite common in the colored community to have back rooms, but in the Black community, you have people just go living in shacks in townships, and that is the difference. But
that is the difference.
In terms of just the economic aspect of it, it's still you still have very little.
Because then also like you get people in the Cape Flats, right, which is also very different economically as well. But I didn't have that experience. So to some extent, yes, I didn't have a lot, but I still feel the reason I said we didn't have much as opposed to I was poor is because I felt like I still had some level of privilege that I only recognized once I was exposed to what other people was going through as an adult. So now I can reflect and look back and be like, I was okay. Like I didn't have to worry about basic needs, which for me is a big thing in determining someone's socio-economic upbringing, basically. And so that's what I meant by not a lot.
And then you get to university. How do you get into UCT?
So I got with my mom. Okay, so the issue was how is that going to be paid for? But for my first year at UCT, I had a bursary. And then after that, it was kind of like we'll see how things go after that, where the money comes from, basically. Until it got to my final year of GDA, and I don't know if you remember the whole fees must fall thing happening, and at some point they were going to take away all the NSFAS loans. And in my third year, that was how I paid for my final year of uni. And basically it was a loan that they say if you passed every single course within your year, it transfers into a bursary.
Okay.
So I had the pressure, right? The pressure driving me. And then I obviously passed all of my courses, and that's how that became a bursary. And then I was supposed to get it for PGDA as well. And they said, no funding this year for PGDA, right?
No.
And I was like, oh dear. And my parents were like, look, it's something you need to do. We'll figure it out. Someone in our community was literally like, you're pursuing an education, they'll pay for it.
Wow.
And literally it was someone that we knew that ended up paying for it. Otherwise, I would have had to just take out the loan and figure it out afterwards.
Wow.
But that's how I ended up debt-free at uni because, number one, NSFAS, thank goodness. And then a random person's kindness, and their condition was that when I grow up and I start earning money, that I start giving back to other people pursuing an education as like paying it forward type of thing. So that's how I got into uni, and how I paid for it, basically.
Wow. And you were touching on the getting into university and seeing other different races.
Yeah.
How was that experience, and how did you integrate with other races? Because I find that, well, when I think it was probably university as well. No, actually, in high school, I went to predominantly college school in Cape Town, and now you have different people in the class, obviously, and I found myself like thinking, what kind of conversations do I have with these people? Because I don't know how we relate, and I think a lot of people stop there because they don't know how to relate to someone that looks different from them.
Yeah.
How did you?
For me, it was a culture shock. Well, I would say that the colored people made up maybe 10, not even 10% of the class. Then the one half of the class is obviously white. Well, maybe 60% is white people. Then the other percentage were all black people. And so there wasn't also a lot of me in the classroom.
And probably black people from rich families, because UCT is expensive.
No, actually not. A lot of people go there on loans and bursaries. So there's a mixture. Obviously, there's the private school accent.
Yeah.
And so you know who's coming from the wealth because the accent gives it away.
Yeah.
But then there was also your everyday person there as well. And that wasn't my first, obviously, experience with black people, because when I was in primary school, even though I went to a Muslim school that was mainly brown people, we had 2 teachers that were black people because they had to teach us Xhosa, right? We had to learn it, well, very basic. I remember like 5 words maybe. And so that was my first exposure actually to black people, is that I had 2 teachers basically at primary school. Then in high school, there was like maybe 5 or 6 black people at most. Not in my grade, not in my class, so didn't really interact with them. So the first time I interacted with black people, white people, was at UCT. I think I'm very fascinated by people naturally and the differences between people. Not because I think one is better than other, but I can appreciate how we're all human, but
all different,
but
yeah.
we're all so different. And for me, that is incredibly amazing and fascinating.
Mm.
And so did notice that when I first got to UCT, there was this automatic divide in that everybody sticks with their own race group, which is natural, especially in an environment like that. You want comfort and something that's familiar, because the rest of it, you feel like an alien,
yeah.
right? Like I remember going to some of the classes, and like there were white people in the class that just seemed to be understanding the lingo that was going on. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, what the hell? Like, this isn't, or they'll be like, oh yeah, like I was having this conversation with my father, and I'm like, this is not how our conversations go.
Other people are like, what is
What is it? So I'm like, that's some of the conversations I have now. My father doesn't have a business. And so for me, it was not only learning content, it was learning from a culture perspective. And I also felt like certain people, like certain races, start off on a very different footing, because you're also getting exposed to these things for the first time that other people were exposed to, because they grew up around those types of conversations.
They know
They
people that have done this.
Like I obviously knew one or two people that were CAs from our community, but they were people from wealthy families already. Also, you just feel like there was very little representation in front of me in terms of teachers, lecturers, tutors, etc. They were all a certain color. And so you also felt like, okay, you being let into the space, as opposed to that you deserve to be there. And I think that's where, because like growing up and you smart in your public school, you're like, okay, I'm smart.
Yeah.
You know? You don't have to think about it. You're like, I'm smart.
Yeah.
I can handle this. You go there, you all of a sudden have this thing in your mind where it's like, oh, I must now prove myself, because people are going to think that I'm not that smart. Because you're also aware of the fact that you look a certain way. The assumption is that you have a certain intelligence level.
And you speak a certain way.
Yeah, and I also have this flat accent, right? I don't have like a whatever accent. This is a colored accent, and it's very recognizable. And even then, I refused to start putting on an accent. I was like, this is how I speak, this is how I speak. But obviously, the way you speak in South Africa can also have an impact on how people perceive your intelligence, right? That's a big factor. And then the other thing is how you look, right? It's almost as if you're not assumed intelligent until you prove otherwise, type of thing. And then I got to my second and third year of uni, and I started seeing brown lecturers in front of me. People that looked like me. And for me, that made the world of difference, right? Because I was like, oh, someone that sounds like me and that looks like me is also in front of me. And I was like, actually, this is something I can do. But still, I had this thing that I had to prove myself. It wasn't that I felt like I was at that point I started doubting my own intelligence. I was like, okay, is everybody, feeling the same way? Because everybody seems so confident at uni, right?
Yeah.
Putting up their hand and being like, and then I'm just sitting there like, okay. And then you see people sitting in the library and concentrating. And then at the time, I obviously also had ADHD, which I didn't know. So I was also undiagnosed with ADHD. And that further played an impact, because I saw everybody sitting, concentrating, studying, and I could barely survive like half an hour in the library before I'm like, oh, this is boring.
Yeah.
Like, how is everybody else concentrating? So I also thought that everybody was also just lying and sitting in the library and pretending to study like I was. So there was like a bunch of factors that was contributing to what I didn't know was making me develop imposter syndrome. And then I applied to be a tutor in my final year of uni. Didn't get it. Decided, okay, I'm going to apply again when I'm in GDA. Because now I started, and I applied to a course where I saw somebody that looked like me, being the course convener. And I was like, I spoke to her, and she helped pull me up, because she was like, no, you can do this. Like, if I can do it, you can do it. And that's how I got into tutoring at UCT. And that was my first exposure to racism, because someone was questioning my intelligence. Because obviously I'm standing there, I had scarf on my head, visibly brown girl with a flat accent, teaching at UCT. And so automatically there was this, Tashina, what she's talking about, type of thing. And you sense it, right?
Yeah.
Anybody that has an experience can be like, oh, how do you know?
You know.
When you're going through it, you know,
know.
right? And then that was also the year that we had to apply to be, you could apply to be an academic trainee, which, if you don't know what that is essentially a year that instead of doing articles at the firm, you do your first year of articles at the university, you tutor, you lecture, you study, right? And so I applied to be UCT 80, which before was not a lot of brown people were being UCT 80s. It was like this prestige thing, right? The year before us had a few brown and black people, but our year was the first year that there were so many. And the comment that was going around is that we got it because of the color of our skin. And that rumor was going around because there were obviously people that were upset that didn't get the position.
Yeah.
To the point where in one lecture, one of our lecturers came in and he was like, and he was a white male, right? And the fact that it has to take a white male to come in and make the statement also says a lot. So he had to come in and say he understands that this is the statement that is being made. But if anybody wants proof, they can come to him and he can show that everybody that's been chosen is sitting in the top half of the class.
So
Like,
what made him
marks-wise.
to come? Did someone officially complain or
No, so like based on the rumors that were going around, it's obviously a thing that was starting to affect people to be like, okay, and they were like, they need to put an end to this because it's not okay. And so that was the reason he came in, and he was like, because he was the course convener for PGDA, and so he was like, he's gonna come in and probably address the class. And he was like, he can prove that everybody that's been chosen is sitting in the top half of the class. If anybody has a problem or wants proof, they can actually come to him, right? After that, it died down. Then we actually started our 80 year, and we used to get tested by
Randomly?
people. Yeah, in our tutorial, when we give tutorials, people would test us to see if we know the course content, right?
no way?
In the tutorial, it became a problem to the point where I think at some point we actually tested it. If I remember correctly, we sent we realized there was a class that was very problematic in one of the courses, and 1 week we sent in a black girl, and 1 week we sent in a white boy, and the way the class handled themselves in that tutorial, very different. And that's when we realized that there was a problem, right? We were experiencing this, but there was nothing we could do. At the same time, we also thought that, if we go through it, it might change minds. And for the people that come after us, it would make a difference. Like for me, I already recognized at that point how important representation is, because I got there because of representation. And so I was like, I need to keep representing no matter what I go through. I just need to keep pushing because it's going to make it easier for the people that come after me. And that was the same thought process I had going even into corporate. So anyway, that was my experience of racism at UCT, to the point where I then knew that going forward, almost in every space that I take up in, I'm going to need to prove myself first before anybody actually thinks, oh, Mumtaz is capable. And then that starts to create an imposter syndrome in your mind, because you start it out and you think, maybe I'm not.
Yeah, maybe I'm not that great.
Maybe I'm not that great, And it's okay. Like, I don't need to be the smartest person in the world, but I at least need my due. Like, I'm not bad, But you start to doubt yourself and you're like, oh my God, everybody's better than me. I'm probably the worst performing one. That's the thoughts that start to play in your mind. You're like, I'm doing the bare minimum. Everything I do is not good enough. And you start negatively talking to yourself. And that also starts taking a toll on yourself emotionally and mentally.
And how you show up as well.
And so that was my experience at UCT. Obviously not all negative. I also got to interact with a lot of amazing people of different races, of different cultures, and I loved it. I like having a diverse group of friends. I love celebrating people's differences. I think it's very tone deaf to be like, oh no, we're all the same. So we're not. We're different.
No,
it's very and the moment you recognize that we are different, but that those are differences that need to be celebrated. It's an amazing thing. But you can't be tone deaf and be like, oh no, we're all the same because we're all human beings.
Yeah, I feel like it happens a lot in South Africa, where people are just like, yeah, we're the same, and kind of get over it. And it's like,
but it's also a conversation people don't want to have. Like, people feel so awkward having that conversation. Like, even like if black people wanted to know what race I am, because obviously it's ambiguous, right? To some people I look Indian, to some people I don't look Indian, so they're like, oh, where does she fall on the spectrum? And they'd be like, they'd be so awkward to ask the conversation, and I'm like, it's not a bad question to ask. Like, it's something you can ask. It's okay.
To talk about
no,
racism.
No one wants to
What
talk
was
about
the experience in corporate? Because I remember, I think I'm very naive in the sense that I don't come into rooms thinking, I'm here to represent black people, I'm here to represent women. I obviously understand the power that I have to walk into that room, or being able to walk into that room confidently is because of people that went before me. But one thing I will not tolerate is being disrespected because of the color of my skin, or because of the way that I talk, or whatever the case may be. And maybe we can start with you, and then I'll talk about my corporate experience.
I would say that my corporate experience in South Africa was my articles years, and those were some of the hardest years of my life, I think. In that it was exhausting emotionally, because I always felt like I had to prove myself. And it wasn't always just internal within the firm, it was externally to the client. Those were the biggest problems, I would say, where you obviously, this little brown girl, fresh out of uni, I was also had a scarf on my head. And if we're honest about it, there is this bias that goes on around Muslim women, right? That Muslim women are oppressed, especially if they have a scarf on their head. And so it's deemed as, probably less intelligent. The Muslim women you see are usually like at the reception, or they a clerk in an office somewhere just processing things. And so you hardly see them as women taking up a position of leadership, or someone with, a certain like that has achieved a certain academic level, whatever. And so when I first got there, I was also a visibly Muslim girl. I wasn't obviously the only one. There were very few of us, but I was also conscious of the fact that I was a darker skinned one, because even in our community, there's a classism when it comes to skin color, right? And so in my community, I'm not fair. So that's already like a thing where you're seen as, number one, maybe a little less beautiful as well. But you're not valued as someone that has fair skin, or lighter skin, basically. And so I was aware of the fact that, number one, I was this dark brown skin girl with a scarf on my head. And I now had to work in this predominantly male environment that was also of not my race, because I was also at a big four firm, where there were people of color, but the people of color struggled in those spaces, if we are honest. And the reason for that is because we always had to work harder than everybody else to meet expectations. Someone could perform averagely and exceed it, but we had to perform excellently to meet it. We could not make mistakes. That was one thing I recognized. I could not make a mistake. But it also meant that, because of the UCT experience, I was also conscious of the fact that however I conduct myself now is going to affect the next visibly Muslim girl that walks in through those doors, and how they're going to perceive her. Are they going to perceive her as, oh, that one messed up, so this one's the same? Because a lot of the time they see us as the same people. We're not individual. They see us as a unit. And so I was very conscious of the fact that however I behave and how I achieve, that's going to impact the people that look like me coming afterwards. And so there was no choice but to be excellent.
Follow your name.
Yeah. And I'm not saying I was the best, but I knew that I couldn't mess up. And I knew I had to behave at a certain way and achieve or my work had to be at a certain level. To the point where they could be like, oh no, we trust Mumtaz, it's fine. Like I needed to be more than meet expectations. But that's also how I am.
But did that reflect on your performance?
Not always, no. And there was an instance where budget was now reduced. So the deadline was tighter. There was more to do. And I had to do it with less budget, less time, less resources. and fix the issues from the year before and pick up issues and bring it into the new year. I did all of that and still went under the budget. So that, for me, that is overachieving, right? I did a lot. And I got, the way it went is it meets expectation, exceeds expectations, and then whatever SEE was, I don't know, super exceeds expectations, I don't remember anymore. But SEE was essentially the highest one. I got exceeds expectations, but the year before me, the person got super exceeds. They got SEE, and I got EE, because even though I performed excellently, to an extent,
you kept.
I kept, because
how are we going to explain this?
Yeah, and then when I asked, and then my feedback, right, was never anything. There was nothing in there.
It's like there's no improvement that you have to do. No,
and at that
you're doing
point,
okay.
I had got into my career where I'm like, the only thing you can come for me is my spelling, because because I don't done spell check. Like, I know that's a problem, and I was like, everybody must have an improvement point. So literally in my feedback would be, when I wrote it for myself, is that I performed here, and my improvement point is that I need to run spell check. That was it. Wouldn't put anything else. Was there a disagreement to that? No, there was not. And yet there was nothing for them to say that I needed to do X and X to get to a certain level. There was nothing concrete they could provide, and still I could not get SEE. I was always at most a EE. And for me, that said a lot, because it was like, what do I have to actually do? If you can't tell me anything concrete, then there's another element to it as to why you do not want to give me SEE. And in my final year of articles is where I nearly cracked. I was ready to leave. I was being overworked. People were not understanding. People were mean. And I went to see this industrial psychologist, and I was like, this line of work's not for me. Like, I can't do this anymore. And she was like, why do you feel that way? And so I started like unpacking about why I felt that way. And we even did like a skills test, or like what type of job would suit you best.
Yeah.
Obviously, accounting was down on the bottom. But it's also subjective, right? However you feel at that point in time is what's going to come through on those tests. But then she was like, you've come this far. You've written all of your board exams. You literally just have to sit a few months till you're done. And at that point, I had written APC. I had no doubt that I would pass, right? I knew I was going to pass. And so literally all I had to do was sit time, and I was not prepared to do that. And so I feel like that alone is telling you what my mental state was like at that point in time, where I was ready to give up. How many years at that point? 6 years?
Yeah.
6 years, 6.5 years.
And a lot of people do. They do give up at that time. Not give up, but the pressure just becomes so much.
And I was like, and no one can say it was because I couldn't pass exams. I knew I was going to pass that APC. So I had achieved everything exam-wise. It was literally just me sitting time, and I didn't want to sit that time. She was like, you in your final year, you really want to give up after working so hard? And I told her, like, look, I don't feel like I've done that well. And she was like, she made me sit down, and she was like, okay, let's reflect on everything you've achieved in your life so far. And she made me recite them one by one, like every achievement I've ever done in my life. And she was like, you sitting here at 23 years old with 3 degrees, because I also did a master's when I was doing AP, which also was an opportunity I didn't expect, because it was free. And I was like, I'll do a master's, it's free, I'm never going to get this opportunity again, I can't afford it on my own. She was like, you have 3 degrees, you achieved in other aspects of your life with X, Y, Z, and you're really sitting there and telling me you don't think you're capable. At 23 years old, you've achieved all of this, and you're telling me you're not capable. And I was like, now that you put it that way,
why if you say that?
maybe I am. And that was the trigger in my mind to start changing how I looked at myself and how I was presenting myself at work, because that was the point where I started being more firm with the managers I was working with, and I stood my ground, not only for myself but for the people that were working under me. Because in your third year, you're the senior, right? So you're the barrier between the rest of the staff and the manager. At that point, I was like, I need to be strong, not only for myself but for the people below me, so that they don't feel the same way I felt when I was going through the experience. Also because I worked with a lot of people of color, and so I know the struggle of what it is to be, number one, learning, and then also the pressure of learning as a person of color in that environment. And I never wanted them to experience what I experienced. So then at that point I started to become more firm in how I dealt with the people above me, but also at the same time try to be cognizant that I need to be compassionate for the people below me, and also bring them up as I move up.
Obviously, someone may be listening and saying, well, you're in corporate. Maybe that's expected. And maybe you have to prove yourself and you have to work hard, because now people feel like or believe that we don't work as hard as they did back in the days and stuff like that. And I want to tie it in with experiencing white South Africans in London as opposed to being in South Africa and working corporate. So my experience working corporate, I remember in my first year, there were only a few of us, a few black people. And as you said, we all stick with our own people. I remember walking into the firm and one of the girls told me, well, we used to sit at this specific floor and we got told not to because some people were afraid of whatever the conversations were. And I had an incident where in the audit room, people would talk in Afrikaans. The partner would come in and just speak in Afrikaans. And obviously, I reported that. That was not acceptable. Because if you're in the audit room back before COVID, you want to talk about whatever you're talking about is beneficial for the whole team. And it makes you feel uncomfortable as well. Because even if you can hear some bits, I did Afrikaans, but I can't remember nothing from high school. But one specific incident that was specific to me was this Afrikaans manager. She came in, we introduced ourselves, 3 black girls, and she said, "Can I call you?" She gave us names. And I was like, there's
Not
no
also
way.
giving names, not even the shorter names.
No. She gave us names, English names. And if you don't understand South African history, black people that had to go work as domestic workers, they were given names to make it easy for their bosses. But that was blatant racism. And I remember going back home and just telling my mom about it. And she was like, that's not right. Because sometimes you think to yourself, like, am I just overreacting, or is this is sitting uncomfortably with me, but I just don't know.
Because you get gaslighted as well. You're like, it's not that deep. Like, I didn't mean it that way. Or...
Exactly. And those are some of the racism or incidents or experiences that you experience in South Africa, corporate South Africa. And let me tell you, especially in Cape Town as well. It's traumatizing, especially in Cape Town. Like, I don't think I would have worked another day in Cape Town. And I feel more comfortable being in a foreign land than being in South Africa. I don't know how people's experiences are in Joburg, but Cape Town, you feel it. I think also just interacting outside of like corporate jobs and just staying in Cape Town, you go to Stellenbosch, and it is almost as if like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, like this is not your area.
This is not your area. Or you go to certain beaches and you get
you started to see people's true colors in university. First of all, when Feast Must Fall happened, you started to see people's real opinions about other race groups, and you were like, oh damn, you thought like that the whole time.
Do you remember you guys at UCT? I think they put white people at the front as a barrier. I remember this. They put white people at the front as a barrier because the police
It's
would
less likely.
It's less likely for
No, but that is
police
something
to.
that you pick up as you go along. In that, in South Africa, it's almost like you need allies. You need those white people who are going to back you in every space that you take up in order for other people to now respect you. And it's even something I picked up at audit firms. Like, it was white male partners that were backing me, not because I was a person of color, but because they purely thought that I was a capable person.
And only when that person says something about you,
And so
then
it's
you
not
are.
everybody that has that inherent bias or that is racist. There's a few, but the dampen they put on the entire place changes the environment for everybody. Because,
True. That's so true. How has moving to London, have you experienced any racism in London? And specifically, how do you interact with white South Africans in in London?
the thing is, in London, my corporate experience is way different. At no point did I feel like I had to prove myself because of how I looked when I walked into the office. Never felt that way.
Yeah.
And at work, I don't even remember like I wore a scarf. But like, even though I wasn't wearing it in my personal life all the time, when I was going to work, the reason I kept wearing it was because I needed these people to know that, number one, I'm a visibly Muslim person. I have boundaries. And also, if someone else walks into this office, I know that already in places like London, there's even fewer of me in corporate spaces. Again, I needed to now create that space for other people that wanted to come in. And that was one of the reasons I kept it on at work. And then also for religious reasons, obviously. And I never felt that way. I was, like, here's the job to do. You were hired, you do it. Like, obviously, if you got through the interview, you must be capable. The issues or the experience I faced wasn't a race thing. It was sexism, I would say. In that everybody knows there's a big gap between males and females in corporate spaces in countries like this, and that barrier still exists. And so you were fighting not because you were a woman of color, but because you were just a woman. And the other thing is that obviously British people naturally take preference in higher positions than someone from outside. But again, that wasn't because of the color of my skin. It was purely because I was from another country. Which country that was from was irrelevant. And so to an extent, it was a bias as opposed to a racism type of thing. I don't know if you felt different.
Yeah. Oh, I feel much more comfortable in London, honestly. And I remember listening to the radio, South African radio station, and they were talking about racism. And obviously, I think most listeners of the station 702 is mostly white South Africans, and they were calling in, talking about, oh, I didn't get a job because I'm white. And I think they had this on two occasions where they were talking about the BE at one point, and then they were talking about what can you do as a white South African to be an ally, basically. And there were many positive examples of people standing up for people. And it just shows that after 30 years of democracy in South Africa, there's still so much racism, and there's still so much, division in that country. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I don't think if we're back home, we'd be having this conversation.
No.
Because it looks completely different. And not because you just don't want to have friends of different, different cultures or different races. It just the way it is. And I guess we also need to start having those difficult conversations to say, to say, don't mean to offend you, but what race are you?
But it's also conversations you need to have within your own families, right? Like, I know that there's a lot of racism that happens within the colored community as well. And there's a lot of, because obviously our parents still grew up during apartheid.
Yeah.
So in their mind, there's still that
Yes.
hierarchy, that existed. Or that in a way still exists in South Africa, actually.
Yeah.
And so they see, okay, for example, colored people will be like, okay, Indians are there, black people are here, right? So the way they talk and treat black people is also very different. And so there was conversations I used to have, even in my own home, to be like, actually, you're saying this, but do you know that you actually can't say that it's problematic? And then they would be like, oh, I didn't know. Because sometimes they didn't realize it, like they didn't mean it in that way, but they also had to learn that the language that they use is important, and that they might have an inherent bias that they were not aware about. I'd be like, you're saying that because you actually feel this way. Do you realize that? And it was conversations that people should be having in their own homes, and it's conversations I used to have and pointed out to people to be like, actually, you know that is not okay.
Yeah.
And that is very difficult conversations to have initially, because we talking to parents and family members that came from apartheid. We are actually the first generation that is born outside of it, that are now growing up as adults in corporate, and so we're experiencing all the firsts basically, and it's very difficult.
Yeah. Even the conversation about dating, like cross culture or cross races, back home is not even a conversation I would have, and not because I didn't find someone else attractive, but it's like, I've never seen that. So,
and even if you see mixed race couples, right, the person who's marrying a white person is seen as marrying up.
Yeah.
And then he's like, why are they marrying down?
Yeah.
People talk about it like that, and you're like, how is one person marrying up and the other person marrying down? And so when you see mixed race couples, they still get lots of looks and lots of stares, like, oh. Because colored people in South Africa, even though by definition we are mixed race, our mix happened. Which is also difficult to explain now in the UK, because I tell people I'm mixed race. So what mix? Brown and brown, like, like what is the mixture? And but here they ask ethnicity, right? Which is also a completely different thing that we don't really talk about in South Africa either. And then when I got here, I would say I'm South African. I didn't know it was a thing to be like, oh, I'm South African, but my ethnicity is Because no matter what race you are in South Africa, you say you're South African. But we still have our issues in South Africa. But when we come outside, it's almost like we don't advertise that to other people. We just have our struggle there internally. Because now when somebody says, oh, but they also South African, I'll be like, yeah, it doesn't matter what color they are, they're also South African. And we stick up for each other here when we're on the outside. But go back home. It's
but I don't know about white South Africans though. Like I feel like I can
sometimes
I can be like, yeah. This is real from South Africa, and then
it depends.
Because I feel like also white South Africans, how they have shown up in the UK as well. They're so phony when they come to the UK, and you know that you wouldn't be interacting with me back home. Like, just don't try me. I do say that there are authentic white South Africans that you can have relations with, but I've found out that most, they want to just keep to themselves.
Yeah. They basically left because they didn't want
to. It's like, I left South Africa because I didn't want to deal with y'all. And then here you are.
You follow me. But also, I think the other reason they struggle, especially in corporate, is because in South African corporate, you don't have to try too hard. You can make mistakes. You can be average, and you can still be seen as okay and get your promotions and stuff. Because
now we face the same struggle.
You're not assumed unintelligent, whereas here you got to struggle the same way we struggled. And so you can see that there's that barrier for them where they start to take it very hard, because now we're so used to being like, I got to prove myself. Okay, let's do this. Here's my job. Get it over with. Now they like, actually, I have to perform in a way I didn't have to perform before. And so now they start to feel the pressure. And that entitlement that was there has to now disappear, because you blend in here. Right? And so see, there's that one or two that like, oh, you're South African, and then they don't want to see you because they're like, actually. But then I actually found that majority of them so happy to see me. They hear my accent and they will follow it and find me. Because I'm also very loud.
Also, at psycho events, I think fine. But if you see them elsewhere, I'll tell you one.
No, like I got approached at like some of my clients, right, where I'm walking on the floor talking to whatever, and then I'll see someone waving at me, and then they'll be like, come here. And then they'll be like, you South African? And I'm like, yeah, I'm South African. They'll be like, I've been here for 15 years, but I miss home so much. It's so lovely
I'm never
to
going
see you.
back.
And then they want to take you by the hand and ask you like, oh, when South Africa are you from? And they're so excited to see me because they heard the accent and they were like, oh, someone from home. And so a lot of the interactions have actually been positive, and they're like, no, they are happy to see me, but then I do have that occasional one or two people that was like, how did you get here?
How did you get here?
What are you doing here?
I ran away from you.
And you followed me. And so it's a mix between the two.
Yeah, I feel like I fall on the other end of the spectrum. Maybe it is still my bias as well, where I feel like I still carry that kind of treatment from back home, and I'm like, don't play with me. Like, yeah, don't play with me. But the people that I've worked with, good, phenomenal. The one I went to a speed dating experience, and there was a white South African.
No, because this happens to me on dating apps, right? Where white South African men will try to match with me, and I'll be like, back home, I know you wouldn't have. I know you wouldn't have matched with me back home.
He was so confused because it's the men that move, right? They move around. I'm sure he wanted to ask me, like, can I change?
Yeah, it's enough for me.
And I was just there like, yeah, here we are.
Here we are.
That was so funny. But obviously, like, we're still our democracy is still very young.
And I also think it's our own, we're so used to that treatment back home that when we come here and we see another white South African, automatically assume, oh, this is going to be my same experience. But I think that a lot of the ones that are now living here, excluding the ones that ran away from South Africa, they are genuinely excited to see any South African, because the reason they came here is not because they didn't feel like as a white South African they weren't getting jobs. They just recognize that in South Africa things are bad at the moment, that everybody can't get jobs. And so it's not that they wanted to move over, it's that they were like, okay, they have the opportunity and the privilege to move over and go set up a life somewhere else, but not because they were trying to run away from the rest of South Africa.
Yeah, those that ran away.
And so you do get the difference. And so now I've learned also to not approach with that mindset. Anybody that I approach with, I'm also way more open. And I think it's as a result of living here for a longer time, where it's so diverse in London, that I've become, even though I've always tried to be open, I didn't realize that to an extent I was still closed off from. Like, I wasn't, I would be friendly with everybody, but I was not making a lot of friends outside my race. And again, it's because you felt, okay, maybe we don't have anything that relates to each other, or what are we going to talk about type of thing. And now I realize that I just yap away, and if somebody wants to yap with me, then we'll yap together. And so I feel like as a person, I've also become more open now that I'm living here compared to when I was living at home.
I had this question, or something that I was thinking about, because we were going to the rugby matches and stuff like that. And obviously we're singing the national anthem, and I was like, oh damn, like, how do you relate to the first part, where it can be perceived as praying like God, as in Christianity God, or do you relate as a Muslim person?
I don't see it like that, right? Because number one, I feel like a lot of the Abrahamic faiths, to an extent, is the same God, and that it differs after a certain period. So, like, even Judaism, right? It goes up until Moses, and then after Moses comes Jesus, and that's where Christianity stops. And then after that comes Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which is where we stop. So, to an extent, our history is still the same. And so when I do something, or like I think of God, I think of my own God, which I think is the same. I assume the same way everybody was thinking about it when they think about reading something like that. They think about their own God. And so I don't see it as like, obviously South Africa is by definition a Christian, or to an extent a Christian country. But it's not in that you don't feel like you can practice any other religion type of thing. It's so free that you don't pick up that it's a Christian country, because there's so many different faiths in South Africa. And everybody can be visibly their own faith without it being a problem. Like, we have lots of Jews in South Africa, we have lots of Muslims, we have lots of Hindus, and everybody gets left to themselves. Like, obviously there's the occasional Islamophobia that happens every few years, but it's not where I've ever had to fear for my life. And I felt the same way coming to London up until 2 weeks ago when everything started happening here in London, and they were like, "Oh, we're stealing their jobs," and all of that. um, but I've never felt unsafe in South Africa when it came to my faith. And I don't see it as something like the difference in religion is something that would separate me from somebody else. I don't think that's how I was raised. So when I hear the national anthem, I see it as all of us living together in harmony more than anything. Like, yes, under one God, but everybody is going to perceive that God as different when they read this.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I just had that thought, and I was like,
no.
something I wanna ask you about. Obviously, yeah, South Africa looks different from looking at from the outside. Yeah, what do you think now that you're here about South Africa and particularly racism?
Yeah, that is a big question. Eh?
Yeah, it's broad.
I feel like a lot of South Africans still have a lot to grow in terms of their mindset. I feel like we need to still have lots of more open conversation in terms of the issues we face in South Africa, the racism we still experience in South Africa. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's so many years have passed. Actually, democracy is only as old as I am. And I mean, in my 30 years of existence, I'm still struggling with my little coming to grips with the little day-to-day issues and trauma I experienced as a child, as a teenager, whatever. Country as a whole, how can they achieve that in the same amount of time as me? When there's structural things that need to change, there's policies that need to change, there's the way we look at each other that needs to change. And so I feel like South Africa still has a lot of growing to do and still a lot of self-reflection to do. And I feel like because we still live in very isolated communities in South Africa, it's going to take a very long time to come out of that mindset. And so now when I go home, I struggle because I'm like, the mindset and the experience is so different compared to how I am now and how I feel like I've changed. Because also living here, we're not only in London, we've also been traveling. Like I traveled to lots of other countries, and that has helped me appreciate how different people are around the world. So the way I view people is also now different. So when I go back home, the way I view life and the way I view other people is completely different. And so I feel it even more when in South Africa. Sometimes when I go home, I feel like there's this weight that gets put back on you when you're back home, and you're like, oh, it's heavy. Like there's something heavy going on in this country, but you can't see it because everything looks okay on the outside.
Yeah.
But inside, there's a lot of work to do. And so that's how I feel about South Africa. I don't think that anything is well. Obviously, things have changed to an extent since apartheid, but lots and lots of work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same. Like even thinking about it, it's like, dating different people. It's like, how do I even explain? Not even explain to, going back home or talking to my parents. It is just someone just looking different. It's not even about the culture or how they grew up, but they look different, and already that is like stark difference that is recognizable. And we have our preconceived ideas of different people. And that's why it was so important for me to have the conversation with you, have the conversation with Grace about her being Nigerian in South Africa. And all of these conversations are, I think, conversations that I have been afraid to have in, talking to you. Obviously, like there's things I would ask, but you can't have that in-depth conversation and let's just talk about you, but also how I've found that I've related to different people. I don't feel like I have to be different. I'm still myself, and I can still come as myself as Lindo Kohle and my culture and being black person, being Xhosa person, but I don't have that barrier of now, what do we even talk about? And I think maybe it is sometimes a socio-economic aspect of it, because we kind of live the same lives, whereas back home, if you are, you don't have the same means, you're probably not going to go to the same places. So it further, separates you. And
but you find that you actually separated less. At home, it would be you separated by race, and then also the type of life you are living at that point in time. Yeah, you separated by the type of life you are living by at the point in time.
Yeah.
In that you now hanging with people because you simply like them as people.
Yeah.
They can show up however they want to show up, however they feel comfortable culturally, race-wise, and you show up how you feel comfortable, and that's okay. And you get along because you at a similar standing in life, and maybe there's one or two common interests, and you can have a nice conversation. And so that also is very different to back home. And so there is that massive gap. But then also I think it's how you are or who you are as a person that also makes a difference, because you can't be friends with everybody. So no one is saying now that you're here, you start making friends with a bunch of different people of different races because now you're different. It's hard to make friends.
Wait. Let me say this. I don't know if I told you. Someone said when they moved to London, we were in office having lunch, and she was like, I don't want to hang out with South Africans because I didn't come to this country to hang out with the same people.
Hang out with the same people. Oh, okay. We had a massive group at lunch. We were there. Yes, as we were loud. But when we were sitting in at lunch, but
and I was just like, my people come, because I think you can still, as you say, like, you're not going with the mindset of I need to make friends with different people because I'm in London. You make friends because you have similar interests. Because it's gonna be phony.
And it's also very hard to make friends at this point in your life when you're this old. That's a topic on its own. And so I think you're more open because you start to recognize there isn't as big a race gap. So you recognize people for who they are and how they're presenting themselves, and whether that aligns with you value-wise. And that's how you start to make friendships, as opposed to back home where you chill with people because that's who's available to you. There's a way more opportunity here, but again, you're not going to make friends with people simply because they're like, I'm in London, I need to be diverse, It's that you genuinely getting to know these people without the barriers that you had back home. And it makes a world of difference.
It does. Well, to wrap up this conversation, I feel like we can keep going on and on and on. What are your final thoughts regarding the conversation that we've had?
It was a big topic. Again, I think I'm in a unique position in that from a colored person, my experience is different compared to a lot of other colored people. So in no way was I trying to talk for all colored people. Because I recognize that within our race there's different cultures, and their standing is very different depending on it's a luck. Whatever you're born into is luck, right? No one can help where they're born and what situation they're born into, but that was my experience. And if anybody ever at any point wants more advice or whatever, they're more than welcome to reach out to me. But it was a conversation that I feel needed to be had, definitely.
We'll definitely have another one. And Mumtaz has a podcast called Unfiltered, right?
Mumtaz Unfiltered.
Mumtaz Unfiltered. And if you want to hear more from her, please head over to her channel. I'll link the channel in the description. Thank you so much for you guys giving us your time and listening in. And please comment and subscribe
and like,
and always do it the other way around. Thank you so much for watching this episode. We'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you on the next one.